Can we talk about these latest revelations? They seem to significantly change the direction of the investigation, don't they? Rather than this being an abduction, perhaps, or her being in the river, the fact they've mentioned alcohol and the menopause and they've been around there before, it changes things, doesn't it?
Well, not really, because if you watch the original press conference from the senior investigating officer, she said she was working on 3 hypotheses. 1, that Nicola went in the river. 2, that she'd been involved with some other third party. Or thirdly, she left the field herself. So all we've been given now by the police conference or the police press conference is the further information that caused them to make a decision to grade her of what is called a high-risk missing person. Now, as the person who wrote National Missing Persons Doctrine and how we grade people, I know something about that. You have a scale and a way of measuring vulnerabilities around someone to decide how many assets you will put to look for them. And in this particular case, because what they had been told by the family, they regarded her as a high-risk missing person. So there's not really been any change, and police are not victim blaming. They're simply just following the leads, as always have done from the past, and others might be accusing them of doing that.
OK, does it not contradict what they said in the very immediate aftermath of her disappearance, which was that this was completely out of character, and to then say, well, there was this background stuff where she'd been visited by police 15 or 17 days before, there were concerns about alcohol and you know, her health generally. Does that not contradict it?
Well, not really, because, of course, the pattern would be emerging of what they actually knew. And as the investigation team started to inquire into other factors, this would have become more relevant, because at the very beginning, they were dealing with an open mind. Either she went into the river or she was the victim of some third-party activity. So, no, I don't think so. I've watched the way the senior investigating officer has explained her thought processes. And to be frank, I think they're doing a very professional job. The challenge you have with something like this, where it's such an unknown, is no one wants to accept the potentially unpalatable, potentially I say, that perhaps the person concerned did in fact voluntarily go into the river themselves and took their own life, because this means everyone else associated with the family will look to blame themselves. So, I mean, the police position is they've got an open mind, but there is no evidence whatsoever from CCTV, 300-odd witnesses, that there's any third-party involvement, and neither is any evidence from CCTV she left that field. So it comes down to the unpalatable and unfortunate fact that probably, and I say probably, she went into the river.
But Kevin, can you not sort of see the public reaction to the sensitivity of releasing information like, mummy was an alcoholic, or being menopausal might make you do erratic things, and releasing medical records to the public like this? That is an intrusion of people's privacy at a delicate time, and the family, isn't it?
Well, yes, it is, but there's always a balance on what I would call public confidence. Lancashire Constabulary have been taking a serious knocking from all sides, as if they're incompetent and don't know what they're doing. And of course, from the very beginning, it would appear that some of the factors they've been considering are the fact that, how can I put it, Ms. Bulley had issues in terms of her behaviour, alcohol consumption, and so on, all of which would lead someone who's involved in these investigations to think potentially she could have taken her own life. But I think it's appropriate probably now, because of the continual criticism from, may I say, so-called experts that don't know all the facts, that they're now putting out some additional facts to help keep the public informed.
Yeah,
one hopes that she will be found.
Go on, finish your point, sorry.
One hopes that she will be found, but from what I've seen at the press conference, it would appear most likely that she's unlikely to be found alive.
Yeah, look, I get the sense from some of the former detectives that we've spoken to this morning that there's quite a sort of defensive approach from some of the police, because you're talking about the public and the so-called armchair detectives who think they're experts. But actually a lot of media, a lot of journalists, myself included, I've been to dozens and dozens of police press conferences. I've covered lots of missing persons inquiries and murders. I'm not saying I'm a detective, but I've been to many of those sorts of press conferences. And to see an SOI stand there and say, trying to dispel myths, but actually raise more questions than they answered by saying there were these vulnerabilities and refusing to say what they were and then having to do a U-turn on that, seemed to me, at best naive, at worst a bit cack-handed.
Well, I doubt it was naive. What she was trying to do was preserve the dignity of the family by saying that there were vulnerabilities,
but did she not
and then later on it emerged.
Questions?
Say again.
Did she not think or have the experience to know that by giving part of that answer, it just raises more questions? I mean, she was trying to answer questions and she ended up creating more.
Well, I'm quite sure she did reflect upon that, because it looks like her age, like she's been in about 20 odd years. So I'm pretty sure of that. And she wouldn't be the senior investigating officer or detective superintendent if she was incompetent. But the fact is, you know, as pushed, it would be appropriate at this stage to say there were other vulnerabilities that may have been a factor. Now, I didn't see the exact words used when it was stated that she used alcohol, and I don't know quite how that came into the mix. But all of these things are factors that could influence the way in which a person thinks if they decide to take their own life. So I think the position with them is they're still open-minded. But the indicators are, and it's why in the first case they said it's a high-risk missing person, because the reality of it would be that actually a woman with children disappearing and being unseen for some hours would not necessarily spark it as a high risk, because you might think either there's been a loss of contact, she's having an affair, or she'll come back later and there's been a row. So gradually, as you become aware of other vulnerabilities, which is we now know that police have been called to the address before, there's been a use of alcohol, then you start to think, oh, hello, we need to put more searches into this. You know, the police put a lot of searches in at an early stage, which they probably would not have done if this was regarded as a low-risk missing person or even a medium risk. Because high risk means a lot of assets pulled in. So I think from the very beginning, the police have gone down that route of thinking she's at risk to herself as well.
You were saying you hadn't heard the specific language, and just in case some of our viewers and listeners hadn't heard the way the police described those vulnerabilities, they said that Nicola suffered with significant issues with alcohol brought on by an ongoing struggle with the menopause, and it was causing some real challenges for Paul and the family. And they went on to say that police and health professionals had attended a report of concern for welfare at Nicola's address on the 10th of January. Listen, really good to get your take, Kevin Hurley, former Detective Chief Superintendent. Thank you very much for joining us this morning.